The CEO got trapped in an elevator with a madwoman until she saved his empire, but in her own way. Before the story begins, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from. Now grab your coffee, sit back, and enjoy this story all the way to the end. Happy watching, everyone. Beatrice knew her life was a mess, but she never imagined that fate would have the creative sense of humor to lock her in a 2x2-meter metal box with the most arrogant man in Manhattan, and a toaster that suffered from existential crises. "Quiet, Clotilde," Beatrice hissed, pressing the cardboard box against her chest as the elevator rose smoothly toward the 40th floor of Empire Tech's imposing headquarters. "If you start smoking now, I swear I'll turn you into a can opener." Arthur Sterling, the company's CEO, the man whose business magazine photos made people feel inadequate just by looking at them, couldn't help himself. He pulled his gaze from his watch and stared at Beatrice, the woman standing beside him. She wore an oil-stained denim jumpsuit, had a pencil stuck in a gravity-defying messy bun, and was talking to an appliance. "Excuse me," Arthur said, his voice a blend of silk and authority. "Did you just talk to a toaster?" Beatrice looked at him. Not the look of admiration he was used to. It was the look of someone far too busy to deal with a pretty Wall Street face. "She's shy in public," Beatrice answered, dead serious. "And you're invading her personal space. Clotilde doesn't like strangers who wear that much expensive perfume. It short-circuits her sensory system." Arthur opened his mouth to point out that this was the executive private elevator, and she had no business being there. But fate decided the scene needed a special effect. Crack! A deafening metallic sound echoed through the shaft, followed by a jolt that threw Arthur and Beatrice against the mirrored wall. The lights flickered frantically before going out completely, leaving only the red emergency light bathing the cabin. "Great," Arthur growled, straightening his $3,000 jacket with trembling hands. "Simply brilliant. I'm stuck with a madwoman and a mystery box." "Madwoman?" Beatrice got up, dusting off her jumpsuit with theatrical indignation. "I'm a self-taught engineer with 3 pending patents, and you're just a guy in a suit who probably can't change a light bulb without hiring outside consultants." She turned to the control panel and landed a precise kick at the base of the metal. "Hey, what are you doing?" Arthur shouted, horrified. "The building's having a total meltdown, Arthur." "Can I call you Arthur?" "Great. This security system is so outdated, my great-great-grandfather could have hacked it with a fork and a lemon." She opened the cardboard box with impressive speed and pulled out the famous Clotilde. Arthur stepped back. The toaster no longer looked like a kitchen appliance. It had fiber optic wires coming out of its slots, a small LED screen blinking blue, and what appeared to be an antenna made from a metal coat hanger. "Listen here, Mr. Empire," Beatrice said, pulling a magnetic screwdriver from her back pocket. "We've got a serious problem. Clotilde just gave me the diagnosis." "The toaster gave you a diagnosis?" Arthur was somewhere between hysterical laughter and absolute panic. "I'm going to be late for the board meeting because a lunatic decided to throw an electronics picnic in my elevator." "Less drama, real life Ken." Beatrice rolled her eyes, beginning to unscrew the elevator panel at superhuman speed. "The problem isn't mechanical. Someone on the outside locked the safety latches, and according to Clotilde's pressure sensor," she looked at the small LED screen showing nothing but random numbers, but put on an expression of pure horror. "Oh my God. What is it?" Arthur's panic was now palpable. "We have exactly 10 minutes of oxygen." Beatrice lied with the most straight face in the world just to see the CEO's expression. "The ventilation system shut down, and this elevator is vacuum sealed for the comfort of billionaires. If you don't stop panting like a tired pug on a sunny day and let me work, we're both going to pass out before Clotilde can reboot the mainframe." Arthur froze. His breath went shallow. 10 minutes? But they'll send a rescue team, right? "The rescue team will arrive just in time to find 2 melted popsicles if you don't shut up and hold my flashlight," she ordered, tossing her phone to him. "Hold this," and pointed at the green cable. "If I cut the red one, we fall 40 floors in free fall. If I cut the green one, maybe we'll have a chance to see the sun again." Arthur Sterling, the man who commanded 5,000 employees, was now crouched on the floor of a dirty elevator, holding a phone with sweaty hands and taking orders from a woman who treated a toaster like it was Stephen Hawking. "Why are you doing this?" Arthur whispered, tension climbing up his spine as Beatrice plunged her hands into the tangle of wires behind the panel. Because I've got a power bill to pay and a toaster to support. Beatrice answered with a mischievous smile, as a blue spark jumped from Clotilde and lit her face with a chaotic beauty that, for 1 second, made Arthur forget he was about to become a popsicle. And because I love proving that guys like you wouldn't last 5 minutes in a basement in Brooklyn. The elevator groaned again. Arthur closed his eyes, praying the mad woman was really the genius she claimed to be. He caught the smell of ozone and the heat of the modified toaster against his leg. There, in the dark, somewhere between nervous laughter and sheer panic, Arthur Sterling's perfectly organized life had just been hacked. The silence in the elevator shaft was so thick that Arthur could hear the ticking of his own heartbeat, or maybe it was just the imaginary countdown to the end of his patience. The red emergency light turned Beatrice's face into something out of a low-budget science fiction film as she plunged her arm elbow-deep into the building's metal innards. "You're chattering your teeth, Arthur," Beatrice remarked, eyes never leaving a tangle of purple wires. "You're creating acoustic interference for Clotilde. She hates sounds of nervous origin." "I'm not chattering my teeth," Arthur replied, even though his jaw was performing an involuntary drum solo. "I'm simply processing the logistics of our premature career termination in this cubicle. It's a risk analysis. Your risk analysis is making you sweat so much that pretty soon we'll need life vests just to stay afloat in here." She pulled a wire with her teeth, releasing a muffled sound. "Hold the phone straight, the light's shaking more than a fishing rod." Arthur gripped the device with both hands. His designer suit was now plastered to his back, and the space seemed to be shrinking, the mirrored walls closing in centimeters with every shallow breath he took. He loosened his tie knot, but the air seemed to have the consistency of a very thick pea soup. "I can't. The air is getting heavy, Beatrice," he whispered, pressing the back of his neck against the cold metal. Beatrice stopped what she was doing. She didn't say "I'm sorry" or "everything will be fine." Instead, she turned around, wiped a grease smudge off her cheek with the back of her hand, and stared at him with one eyebrow raised. "If you pass out right now, I'll use Clotilde's voltage to give you a reality shock, Arthur. And I guarantee she doesn't have a gentle setting." Arthur's eyes went wide, the momentary jolt beating back the nerves. "You wouldn't do that." "Test your luck." She shrugged and went back to the panel. "But if you want to keep your dignity and your focus, I need you to distract your brain. Sing something." "I don't sing. I manage empires, then manage a melody, genius. Right now, something with a steady rhythm. It helps calm the nerves." "Go on, the star one." Arthur let out a dry, hollow laugh. "I'm the chief executive officer of a multi-billion-dollar technology company. I'm not singing a lullaby in a broken elevator." "Fine." Beatrice gave a violent yank on a cable. "Clotilde, activate shock mode." "Twinkle, twinkle, little star. How I wonder what you are." Arthur's voice came out thin, hoarse, and deeply humiliated. "Louder. I'm not feeling the magic of childhood astronomy." Beatrice kept the beat inside the panel, tapping with a screwdriver. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star." He raised his voice, squeezing his eyes shut as a tear of pure embarrassment rolled down. "That's it. Now with more soul." She cheered him on, her fingers flying over a small keypad she had coupled to the elevator's motherboard. In the middle of the second verse about celestial brilliance, Clotilde's screen lit up in fluorescent green. Beatrice's smile vanished instantly, replaced by a stillness that tied Arthur's stomach in a knot. "Arthur, stop singing," she said, her voice suddenly cold and technical. "What happened? Did the air run out for real?" He stopped immediately, panic returning at full force. "Forget the air. That was just to keep you focused on what matters," she admitted, but her eyes never left the screen. "The problem is that this isn't a mechanical failure. Someone inserted an intrusion command into the elevator's code. They're simulating a power outage to lock the doors from the outside." "Sabotage?" Arthur leaned forward, his business instincts taking over from fear. "Who would do that?" "Who benefits if you don't make it to the board meeting today?" she asked, pointing to a blinking code on the toaster's screen. "Look at this." The digital source address is masked, but the intrusion protocol has the signature of a system I've only seen on secret high-tech forums. Arthur went silent for a long moment. His hands stopped trembling, but his face went pale in a different way. "The board of directors," he murmured, his voice carrying a disappointment he tried to hide behind an icy mask. "They want to vote me out. My father built this building brick by brick. He used to say the elevator was the backbone of the company. If they bring me down here, it's as if they're erasing his memory. Beatrice looked at him. She saw the way he gripped the cuff of his shirt. A small gesture that gave away the fact that this company wasn't just money. It was the last connection he had to someone he loved. She eased her grip on the tool. "Hey," she called, giving his foot a light kick. "They may have the security code, but they don't have a crazy engineer with a combat toaster. Beatrice, you don't understand the danger." Before he could finish, the elevator let out a violent metallic snap. The steel cable above them whipped against the wall and the cabin lurched, dropping sharply for several endless meters. Arthur cried out and threw himself to the floor. Beatrice grabbed onto the open panel, her feet leaving the ground for a second before the mechanical safety brakes kicked in with an impact so violent it nearly caused a disaster. The cabin swung like a pendulum over an enormous void. The smell of burnt rubber flooded the small space. "Arthur!" Beatrice shouted over the sound of grinding metal. "I need you to bite down on that silk tie right now." "Why?" he shouted back, eyes wide. "Because I'm going to make a direct connection to the motor, and it's going to generate a vibration that'll make your teeth feel like jackhammers." She plunged her hand into the panel, pulling out two thick cables that were sparking like rockets. "You're going to blow us to pieces. Either that, or you accept that 'Twinkle, Twinkle' was the last thing you ever sang in your life." She touched the wires together, and a blinding blue flash filled the elevator. The cabin lurched upward. The metal doors began to groan and slowly open, revealing not the ground floor, but a dark, dusty floor that looked like it had been sealed off for decades. Arthur looked at the gap, breathing hard, seeing the exit just a few centimeters away. But something in the dark hallway made him freeze. "Beatrice," he whispered, pointing to the shadow moving at the end of the forgotten floor's corridor. "I don't think we're the only ones who are waiting for this elevator to open." Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs as he stared at the dark silhouette at the end of the dusty hallway. The figure was tall, motionless, and seemed to be watching their every move with a sinister stillness. "Beatrice," Arthur whispered, backing to the far wall of the cabin and pulling her by the jumpsuit sleeve. "Don't go out. There's someone out there. And I don't think it's the welcome committee." Beatrice narrowed her eyes, adjusting the phone's flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness of the deactivated floor, revealing a plastic mannequin wearing an 80s polyester suit and holding a rusty metal tray. "It's a plastic butler, Arthur." Beatrice let out a bored sigh, stepping out of the elevator with a jump. "Relax. It's just the old marketing storage floor. The only thing it's going to attack is your sense of fashion." Arthur released the breath he didn't even know he'd been holding, feeling his face go warm. "I knew that. I was just testing your reflexes under pressure." "Sure you were," she scoffed. She scoffed, already sticking her head back into the elevator panel from outside. "Now stop flirting with the mannequin and help me out here. If I don't do a manual short circuit on the speed limiter, this elevator's gonna sit here until the next eclipse." With one precise pull, and another shower of sparks that left Arthur's hair slightly standing on end, she forced the system to recognize the executive floor as the only possible destination. They jumped back inside seconds before the doors shut like the mouth of a hungry alligator. The elevator shot up like a runaway rocket. Arthur held on to the handrail as Beatrice tried to keep Clotilde balanced. The toaster was now making a sound like a badly tuned radio. When the doors finally opened on the 42nd floor, the impact was like a bucket of cold water. The silence was absolute. 12 impeccable shareholders had their arms raised in the middle of a vote. Vice President Marcus was holding the wooden gavel a hair's width from the table, wearing a smile that disappeared faster than a Christmas bonus in a bad year. "We hereby declare Arthur Sterling removed for negligence of..." Marcus stopped. The gavel slipped from his hand and landed squarely on his own big toe. "Arthur?" Beatrice didn't wait for the red carpet. She marched out of the elevator looking like a survivor of a technology desert. Her hair was at an impossible angle, and she had a streak of black grease across her nose like war paint. "Who's the genius running a 2010 firewall in here?" Beatrice roared, her voice echoing through the luxurious room and making the crystal glasses vibrate. "Seriously, I've seen more modern security systems and stuffed animal claw machines." Arthur stepped out right behind her, trying to maintain his CEO posture while his silk jacket displayed a generous tear at the shoulder. "Marcus, Arthur said, his voice coming out cold and sharp as the ice now melting in the glasses on the table. I hope that vote was nothing more than a dramatic rehearsal for your theater class. Look at yourself, Arthur. Marcus recovered, trying to laugh while hiding his injured toe under the table. You show up late, covered in oil, accompanied by a person who looks like she was ejected from a landfill? This only proves you've lost your mind. The sting of public humiliation hit Arthur. He saw the judging looks from the shareholders, the kind of look he had feared ever since he'd taken his father's place. But Beatrice had no patience for power games. She walked up to the oak table, pushed Marcus's tablet aside with the tip of her screwdriver, and placed Clotilde right in the center like a war trophy. Listen here. Cheap clothing catalog model, Beatrice pointed at Marcus. Arthur isn't late because he missed his alarm. He's late because someone used an override command to lock the elevator. And if I hadn't used this toaster's brains to rewrite the building's code, you'd all be arguing right now about who gets to inherit the filing cabinet. This is outrageous, Marcus shouted, rising to his feet. Get this madwoman out of here. The madwoman, Beatrice smiled dangerously, pressing a button on Clotilde, just projected the server access log onto your 80-inch screen. Arthur, take a look at the origin terminal that sent the lock command. Arthur looked at the screen. The digital address was unmistakable. It was the personal computer in Marcus's office. The room erupted in murmurs. The game had turned. Arthur felt the strength return to his legs. He walked toward Marcus, who had now turned the color of a blank sheet of printer paper. The meeting is over, Marcus, Arthur said calmly. And I suggest you use the stairs. The elevator? Well, the elevator now has security standards you wouldn't understand in 1,000 years. Beatrice grabbed a mini cucumber sandwich from the buffet table and looked at Arthur. So? What does a security consultant get for saving the day? She gets a contract. Arthur smiled for the first time all day, looking at the extraordinary woman in front of him. And if I'm lucky, she'll teach me how to fix Clotilde. Beatrice took a bite of the sandwich and made a face. First, we find real food. This tastes like wallpaper. And second, you owe me a new toaster. Preferably one that doesn't try to shock me every 5 minutes. Arthur Sterling had never seen a rat wearing a safety helmet until he walked into Beatrice's basement. He was standing at the entrance of a brick building in Brooklyn, holding a leather envelope and trying to protect his suede shoes from a puddle of questionable origin. Beatrice, are you down there, or did I just walk into a post-apocalyptic science fiction movie set? Arthur shouted, his voice echoing between stacks of tube monitors and giant gears. Watch your left leg, Sterling. Beatrice's voice came from the back of the basement. The guard bot has a proximity sensor problem, and it bites anyone who wears rich people perfume. Arthur froze with one foot in the air. A small pile of aluminum cans on shopping cart wheels buzzed past his shin, emitting a sound like a blender processing gravel. He leaped to the side, landing precariously on a stack of circuit boards. You live here? Arthur asked, finally spotting Beatrice. She was hanging upside down from a metal beam, welding something that looked like a satellite dish made of umbrellas. She wore oversized safety goggles that made her look like a shiny insect. I don't live here, I process information, she answered, jumping down from the beam and landing with an impact that raised a cloud of dust. What do you want, Arthur? Did the Wi-Fi in your penthouse stop working, and you don't know how to unplug and replug the router? Arthur held out the leather envelope. I came to make our partnership official. I spent the night with my legal department. This is an exclusive consulting contract. 7 figures, Beatrice, plus a state-of-the-art lab at the top of the tower, with a view of Central Park and air conditioning that doesn't smell like burnt oil. Beatrice took the envelope with the tips of her grease-stained fingers, leaving a perfect fingerprint on the expensive leather. She opened it, read the first page for 5 seconds, and handed it back against Arthur's chest. No, thank you. I'm allergic to contracts with more than 2 pages of footnotes. No? Arthur blinked, stunned. Beatrice, that number pays for your building. It pays for 10 buildings like this one. I don't work for someone who wears a tie that costs the gross domestic product of a small island nation, Arthur. She turned back, returning to her tangle of wires. I like my freedom. Here I decide whether Clotilde is going to be a toaster or an anti-aircraft defense system. In your company, I'll have to fill out forms just to buy one screw. Arthur walked through the space trying to make sense of the chaos. He saw a machine that appeared to filter rainwater using nylon stockings, and an old computer being used as a shim to level a wobbly table. In the corner, a small screen displayed energy consumption graphs for a local animal shelter. "You spend your time hacking the power grid to help kittens?" Arthur asked, his voice softening. "Kittens are more grateful than shareholders," she shot back, but her sarcasm failed when a water drop fell from the ceiling directly onto her main keyboard. Beatrice let out a heavy sigh, a sound she tried to disguise as a yawn. She quickly covered the keyboard with a piece of torn canvas. Arthur noticed that, despite all the technological genius, the basement walls had deep moisture stains, and 3 yellow notices were taped to the inner metal door. He stepped closer, ignoring the guard bot now attempting to chew through his shoelace. "Beatrice? Why is there an eviction notice dated yesterday on your door?" Arthur asked quietly. The inventor stopped. Her shoulders went rigid for a split second before she started laughing, a forced laugh that never reached her eyes. "Oh, that? It's a social experiment. I want to see how long it takes the court officers to get through my computer parts minefield. It's all fun, Sterling." Arthur didn't laugh. He looked at her hands, which were now trembling slightly as she tried to fit a piece that was too small into an impossible place. He spotted the stack of unpaid bills hidden under a diagram of a new type of low-cost wind generator. "You're spending every cent you earn developing free technology for other people, and there's nothing left for your rent," Arthur stated, not as an accusation, but as an observation that seemed to hurt him. "I don't need your billionaire pity." She turned sharply, her voice sharp as a razor. "I'm fine, I always figure it out. I'm Beatrice, remember? I fixed your empire with a toaster. I'm not offering pity." Arthur stepped forward, moving into her personal space, ignoring the smell of ozone and dust. "I'm offering a platform. You want to change the world with your social inventions? Do it with my resources. Use my money to buy the parts you need for these people, instead of going hungry to afford a silicon chip." Beatrice opened her mouth to fire back a sarcastic response, but the sound of a heavy knock on the metal door upstairs cut her off. "Miss Martinez?" An authoritative voice echoed from the floor above. "This is the New York City Department of Housing. We have a court order." Beatrice looked at the ceiling, then at her machines, and finally at Arthur. For the first time, the invincible madwoman mask cracked. She pressed Clotilde against her chest, fingers white from the grip. "If I accept," Beatrice whispered, her voice faltering, "I want my own floor. And I want to bring the plastic butler from your storage room." Arthur felt a strange tightening in his chest, something no profit graph had ever caused. "You can have the entire floor, Beatrice, and I'll carry the mannequin on my back myself." He extended his hand, not the contract, but an open hand. Beatrice hesitated, looked at her grease-stained hand, and then at the CEO's immaculate one. She wiped her palm on her jumpsuit and shook his hand, a quick gesture that sealed both their fates. "Great," she said, catching her breath and her sarcasm. "But fair warning, if you try to put a photo ID on me wearing a suit, I'll reprogram the executive floor coffee machine to serve only pickle juice." Arthur smiled, pulling her toward the secret exit she had in the back. "Deal. Pickle juice for all the directors." As they climbed the stairs to Arthur's luxury car, Beatrice looked back one last time at her basement, not knowing that the greatest technological challenge she would face wasn't a piece of code, but the fact that her heart was beginning to beat at the same rhythm as Arthur's. Beatrice stared at the pair of stiletto heels on the car floor like they were medieval torture devices designed to end civilization. Arthur, sitting beside her, tried not to laugh while adjusting his silver cufflinks. "If I put those on, Arthur, my center of gravity is going to be shifted into next year," she warned, poking the thin heel with her fingertip. "It's physically impossible to keep your balance on 2 toothpicks." "It's a charity gala, Beatrice. You're my partner now." "Partners don't wear acid-stained rubber boots to gala events," Arthur replied, even though his eyes were fixed on the way the midnight blue silk dress highlighted her posture. "I'm not wearing boots," she shot back, lifting the hem of the long dress to reveal a pair of beat-up black high-top sneakers. "I'm wearing aerodynamic efficiency. And what if there's a fire? You'll be tripping over your own luxury while I'm leading the evacuation at 10 miles an hour. Arthur sighed, but the gleam in his eyes gave away that he'd already given up on winning that argument. When the car stopped in front of the Grand Regency Hotel, he stepped out and extended his hand. Beatrice took a deep breath. slipped on the heels with a groan of agony, and tried to take her first step on the red carpet. Her knees buckled inward, like those of a newborn baby giraffe. She grabbed Arthur's arm with the strength of a hydraulic press. "If you let go of me, Arthur Sterling, I'll reprogram your electric toothbrush to play national anthems at 3 in the morning, she hissed through her teeth, keeping a fixed smile for the photographers. "Keep your chin up and don't look at your feet," he whispered back, feeling the warmth of her hand through the fabric of his jacket. They entered the main ballroom, an ocean of gold, marble, and people who looked like they'd been polished with car wax. Arthur paused for a second, and the grip on his arm loosened. He turned to look at Beatrice. Without the dirty jumpsuit and the grease on her face, she looked like a painting that had just come to life. The blue of the dress made her eyes shine with an intelligence that no jewel in the room could ignore. "You look." Arthur started, his voice dissolving in his throat. He cleared it and adjusted his lapel. "The dress isn't interfering with your circuits, I hope." Beatrice felt his gaze and, for a split second, forgot how to breathe. But the silence didn't last. She looked up at the colossal crystal chandelier hanging over the dance floor. "Arthur, that crystal chandelier in the center? The third branch, from the left, has a 60 Hz frequency oscillation. The wiring is overheating. If anyone starts dancing too close to the harmonic vibration of that column, we're going to have a $10,000 crystal shower raining down on the New York elite." Arthur let out a short laugh, the romantic mood shattered by her technical precision. "Only you would look at a crystal chandelier and see a fire hazard." "Somebody has to be the adult around here," she said, losing her balance again and without thinking, kicking the stilettos under a side table with visible relief. "There. Now my brain is working again." While Arthur stepped away for a moment to greet an important investor, Beatrice leaned against a pillar, feeling like an electronic component installed in the wrong motherboard. She opened her small evening bag and checked whether her portable multimeter and mini screwdriver kit were still inside. They were. "So this is Sterling's new acquisition?" A female voice, thick with the accent of a very expensive private school, echoed behind her. Beatrice turned around. Two women in dresses that looked like they were made of expensive aluminum foil were watching her with smiles that never reached their cheeks. "I heard he found her in a basement in Brooklyn," the other one remarked, pretending to admire the chandelier. It must be hard for Arthur, having to clean someone up and hand out a partner title just to justify the fact that he has a soft spot for street girls. He always had that hero complex, poor thing. Beatrice felt a chill in her stomach that had nothing to do with the chandelier or the lack of oxygen. She gripped the strap of her bag, her fingers finding the cold metal of her tools. She didn't respond. Instead, she looked at Arthur across the ballroom, laughing at something a senator was saying. He looked like he belonged in that world of lights and appearances. Her? She belonged to the shadows, to the smell of solder, and to the raw, unfiltered truth of machines. She took a step back, feeling the marble floor beneath her feet like proof that she would never fit in there. She wasn't a partner. She was an experiment Arthur was trying to run. Beatrice turned her back on the caviar buffet and walked toward the balcony, where the night air of New York didn't smell of expensive perfume, but of the real city she loved so much. She pulled a small chip from her dress pocket and began spinning it between her fingers, a habit that always calmed her when the world felt too loud. Arthur watched her from a distance, noticing the way she had drawn into herself and how her fingers wouldn't stop working the chip. And for the first time, he realized that the glitter of gold in the ballroom was dull compared to the spark he was about to lose. The silicon chip spun between Beatrice's fingers at a frantic pace, the only sound on the balcony besides the cold Manhattan wind. She wasn't looking at the view. She was mentally calculating how many volts it would take to fry that ballroom's sound system without tripping the building's emergency circuit breakers. The view is better when you're not planning a technological collapse, you know? Arthur's voice came from behind her, but she didn't slow her hands. "I don't plan collapses, Arthur. I just facilitate fate," she answered, finally tucking the chip back into her dress pocket. "And the fate of that caviar buffet is to be swallowed by people who can't tell the difference between a router and a toaster." Before Arthur could respond, the balcony door swung open with an unnecessary bang. Marcus, the ousted vice president, appeared holding a champagne glass like it was a scepter. He looked like a peacock trying to reclaim lost territory. "Arthur, what a surprise to find you out here with your—" He paused dramatically, looking Beatrice up and down, stopping at the feet peeking out from beneath the silk. "With your personal mechanic. I was just telling the shareholders about your new talent. Tell me, darling, which elite university did you graduate from? Or did your diploma come in a cereal box?" Beatrice felt the air leave her for a second. Her hands dove into the evening bag, finding the modified multimeter. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked at his reflection in the balcony glass. "I didn't finish college, Marcus," she said, her voice so low that Arthur had to lean in to hear. "Some people prefer to learn how things actually work, instead of learning how to pretend to work in boardrooms." "Ah, I see. A self-taught garage inventor." Marcus laughed, turning toward a group of guests drifting closer, drawn by the scent of conflict. "That explains why your name was tied to that plagiarism scandal at the engineering school 5 years ago. Expelled for trying to steal a professor's project, wasn't it? Good to know Arthur is now hiring academic criminals to handle our industrial secrets." The silence that followed was heavy. Arthur saw the way Beatrice locked her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the bag strap until her knuckles went white. He stepped forward, but Beatrice was faster. "You want to talk technology, Marcus?" Beatrice asked, pulling a small device with blinking lights from her bag. "Let's talk about wireless audio transmission." She pressed a red button. In the center of the ballroom, Marcus walked to the podium, planning to make a toast that would humiliate Arthur once and for all. He switched on the microphone, but instead of his arrogant voice, the hotel's high-fidelity speakers began blasting a deafening sound of a panicking zoo. "Cock-a-doodle-doo." The sound echoed with such force that the chandeliers trembled. Marcus tried to speak, but every time he opened his mouth, the sound system translated his words into loud pig snorts. The guests started laughing, first quietly, then in open, unrestrained laughter. Marcus beat on the microphone, turning red as a tomato as the sound of a hysterical chicken filled the room. "What did you do?" Marcus roared, charging toward the balcony. Arthur stepped in front of him, body rigid, palm planted firmly against Marcus's chest, with enough force to make him stumble. "She didn't do anything except reveal what comes out of your mouth," Arthur said, his voice vibrating with contained fury. "And about the plagiarism. I read the original case file. The professor stole her code because he couldn't accept that a first-year student was 10 times more brilliant than him. I didn't hire a criminal. I hired the person who's going to rebuild this company while you go looking for your next microphone." Arthur grabbed Beatrice's arm and pulled her off the balcony, crossing the ballroom as the sound of a donkey braying followed Marcus all the way across the room. They only stopped when they reached the hotel's deserted garden. Arthur let go of her arm and noticed that Beatrice had gone still, staring at nothing, her hands trembling violently inside her pockets. "Beatrice," he began, reaching toward her, then pulling back before touching her. He was right about one thing. She whispered, her voice brittle, stripped of its usual sarcasm. "I was expelled. They took everything. My code, my scholarship, my name. I spent 5 years living in a basement because nobody hires someone with 'liar' stamped on their resume." Arthur didn't say he was sorry. He knew she'd hate that. Instead, he stepped closer, took off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering the silk dress and the vulnerability she was trying to hide. "Your name is not what's in that case file, Beatrice," he said, looking directly into her eyes, where tears stubbornly refused to fall. "Your name is what's on my company's contract. And tomorrow the whole world is going to know that the only thing you stole tonight was my ability to care what these people think." Beatrice looked at the luxury jacket, then at the CEO now standing in just his shirt, sleeves rolled up, looking ready to fight the whole world for her. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, leaving a smeared mascara streak that looked once again like war paint. "The pig sounds were a nice touch, weren't they?" she asked, the sarcastic gleam slowly returning to her eyes. "The donkey bray at the end was my favorite," Arthur admitted, offering his arm again. "Now let's get out of here before you decide to hack the garden sprinklers." As they walked to the car, Beatrice pressed Arthur's jacket against her body, feeling his scent mixed with the metallic smell of her multimeter, not noticing that the shadow following them through the garden wasn't just the hotel security guard. Arthur Sterling's penthouse smelled of expensive leather furniture, success, and now an alarming amount of solder smoke. Beatrice was sitting on the Italian marble floor, surrounded by 3 monitors and the faithful Clotilde. Connected directly to the home's mainframe through a network cable she'd improvised from coat hanger wire. "Arthur, I need fuel," Beatrice announced, eyes never leaving a line of code that insisted on staying red. "And by fuel, I mean processed carbs and saturated fat. Order a pizza." Arthur, who was trying to decode the manual for his own ultramodern coffee machine, picked up his phone with the expression of someone about to perform open-heart surgery. "All right, I'll use the delivery app my secretary installed," he murmured, scrolling across the screen. "What flavor?" "Pepperoni, with a cheese-stuffed crust." "If there's no stuffed crust, Clotilde goes on strike," she answered, typing furiously. There was a 2-minute silence, broken only by the sound of the keyboard. Suddenly, Arthur cleared his throat, looking deeply uncomfortable. "Beatrice, what's the name of this street?" Beatrice stopped typing and looked at him, disbelieving. "You're kidding, right? How long have you lived here?" "I always come by car with a driver." Arthur defended himself, his face picking up a light shade of pink. "The car goes into the underground garage. The elevator comes straight up here. I've never needed to know the mailing address. I just know the building is big and has my name on top." Beatrice burst out laughing, a laugh that echoed through the double-height ceiling hall. She stood up, took the phone from his hand, and started filling in the information. "You're a logistical disaster, Sterling. How do you manage a global company and can't direct a pizza delivery guy to your own couch?" "I manage people who know addresses," he shot back, though he ended up smiling watching her so completely at ease in the middle of his luxury sanctuary. They got back to work while they waited. Arthur sat down beside her on the floor, abandoning his designer armchair. The closeness was inevitable. Every time Beatrice leaned over to point out a flaw in the system, the scent of her coconut soap mixed with his cedar cologne. "Look at this," she whispered, pointing at the screen. "If we integrate Clotilde's processing core with your cloud, the encryption speed is going to quadruple." Arthur leaned in to see, his hand resting on the floor just centimeters from hers. He could see the reflection of green code in Beatrice's eyes. She stopped talking. The sound of rain striking the massive glass windows seemed to create a bubble around the two of them. Arthur looked at her lips, then her eyes, and time seemed to slow down, like an overloaded processor. He started to lean in. Beatrice didn't pull back. She just let out a slow breath, her fingers still above the keys. Beep, beep, beep. A bright red alert began flashing across all the monitors at once. Beatrice jumped back, the spell broken by pure technical instinct. "Intrusion," she shouted, hands flying across the keyboard. "Someone's trying to access the merger files right now." "But the defense system you installed was supposed to block that," Arthur said, snapping back into CEO mode, even though his heart was still beating to the rhythm of the interruption. "The block is working against external attacks, Arthur," Beatrice said, her face going pale under the monitor light. "The problem is that the command isn't coming from the internet. It's coming from inside this network. Someone's using a physical device plugged directly into one of the entry ports in this house." Arthur looked around the empty room. "That's impossible. There's nobody here but the two of us." Beatrice didn't answer. She started tracking the signal, fingers trembling. The graph on the screen showed a map of the penthouse. A blue dot blinked persistently at Arthur's upstairs office. "The signal's coming from the secondary terminal," she whispered. "The one you said only your family and your trusted housekeeper have the password for." Arthur felt a punch to the gut. He ran up the stairs with Beatrice right behind him. When they opened the office door, they found a small device, the size of a matchbox, plugged into the side of Arthur's personal computer. It was a physical data capture device. Arthur picked up the device, his eyes fixed on the family photo sitting on the desk. His housekeeper, the woman who had watched him grow up and who cared for that home as if it were her own, was the only one who had been there in the last hour to drop off clean towels. "She wouldn't do this," Arthur said, his voice faltering. "She's like a mother to me." Beatrice stepped closer and looked at the device. She spotted a small mark on the side of the plastic, a symbol she recognized instantly. It was the same symbol as the professor who had gotten her expelled. "She may not have had a choice, Arthur," Beatrice said, her voice soft for the first time. "This device is a model used for blackmail. They didn't just want the data. They wanted it to be someone you love, to destroy you from the inside out." Arthur sank into the leather chair, holding the small object as if it were proof that the whole world was against him. The pain of betrayal was colder than the room's marble. Beatrice didn't say, "I told you so." Instead, she sat on the arm of the chair and placed her hand on his shoulder, a firm, silent gesture. "Arthur," she said, "we're not just going to block that signal. We're going to send a present back to whoever sent this. A present that's going to make their computer look like a Sunday barbecue." Arthur looked at her, and the sadness in his eyes was replaced by a spark of fierce determination. "Do it," he ordered. "Burn it all down." As Beatrice returned to the keyboards, Arthur stared at the open door, realizing that the war he thought he'd won in the boardroom was only the beginning of a siege that was closing in around him. The empty space on Arthur Sterling's oak desk was louder than any security alarm. Beatrice stood before the spot where, until 5 minutes ago, Clotilde had rested with her tangled cables and blinking lights. She didn't scream, she didn't run. She just started counting her own breaths, her fingers opening and closing in the air, trying to grasp something that was no longer there. "Beatrice, I've already called building security and the police," Arthur said, walking into the office while trying to get his arm through the sleeve of a jacket he was wearing inside out. They couldn't have gone far. Whoever came in here knew exactly what they were looking for. They think they took the prototype of our new software. Beatrice sat down on the floor, right where the desk's shadow fell. She hugged her knees and began rocking slightly. The sarcasm that was her armor seemed to have melted away, leaving only a frightened young woman in the middle of $1 million room. "It's not the software, Arthur," she whispered, her voice so thin it seemed like it might break. "The software is encrypted in the cloud. Clotilde was just the interface. They took my grandmother." Arthur stopped wrestling with his jacket and knelt down in front of her. "Your grandmother? Beatrice, what are you talking about? It's a 1980 toaster." "The crumb tray," she said, and a heavy tear finally fell, carving a clean path through the solder dust on her cheek. "It was sealed with industrial resin. Her ashes are inside. She was the only one who never called me crazy when I started taking apart radios at 6 years old. She used to say that if I could fix the world, I should start in the kitchen." Arthur felt a knot in his throat that no financial loss had ever caused. He stood up with an agility that surprised even himself. "We're getting that toaster back, right now." 10 minutes later, Arthur was on the phone with the police dispatch while driving his sports car through Manhattan at a speed that would have given his driving instructor a heart attack. "Yes, officer, I want to report a theft," Arthur shouted over the speakerphone, swerving around a yellow cab. "The item? It's a toaster." "Yes, a toaster. It has camera tripod legs and an antenna made from an egg beater. No, I am not under the influence of any substances. It's a piece of advanced technology with incalculable sentimental value." "Arthur, turn right at the next block," Beatrice shouted beside him, working a tablet showing a blinking red dot on the map. "I installed an emergency tracker in the bread processor. They're heading for the docks." Arthur's car lurched into a turn, the tires screaming on the asphalt. He was sweating, his tie now wrapped around his wrist like a battle bandage. "If that professor lays one finger on Clotilde, I'll buy his university just to turn it into an abstract art museum dedicated to toasters." Arthur roared, pressing the accelerator. They spotted the black van near the port warehouses. Arthur blocked the vehicle's path with a maneuver he had clearly seen in some spy film, stopping the car sideways across the lane. He was out of the car before Beatrice, pointing his finger at the driver trying to pull away. "Give back the toaster," Arthur shouted, looking less like a CEO and more like an angry neighbor defending his lawn. "Right now, or I swear I'll use every bit of my legal influence to have you sued down to the very air you breathe in New York." The driver, a thin man who looked like a frightened lab assistant, threw a cardboard box out the window and floored it, mounting the sidewalk to escape. Arthur dove onto the asphalt, grabbing the box before it hit the ground. He sat there on the dirty dock pavement, breathing hard, holding the box against his chest. Beatrice ran to him and dropped to her knees. Arthur opened the box carefully. There she was, Clotilde, a little dented on the side with a loose wire hanging but intact. Beatrice picked the toaster up, running her fingers over the sealed crumb tray. She let out a sob that turned into hysterical laughter. "She's okay. She's here," Beatrice said, hugging the cold metal toaster. "Arthur, you threw yourself in front of a car because of a toaster. Arthur felt a small scrape on his elbow and looked at her. He was disheveled, covered in grease and oil, his suit ruined. "I didn't throw myself for the toaster, Beatrice," he said, and the tone of his voice made her laughter stop. "I threw myself for the toaster's owner." Beatrice looked away, her face flushing under the yellow glow of the port streetlights. She pulled a small screwdriver from her pocket and started tightening a loose screw on Clotilde, the metallic sound being the only answer she could manage in that moment. "You're a disaster, Sterling," she murmured, but the way she straightened his collar as they walked back to the car said otherwise. Arthur smiled, feeling like he'd recovered much more than ashes and circuits. But Clotilde's sudden silence, which should have been emitting a system-secure signal, made him realize the villain may have left one last present inside the machine. The $30,000 projector in Manhattan's Central Auditorium blazed with a cruel clarity, displaying the name Professor Crawford in golden letters. On stage, the man who had buried Beatrice Martinez's career adjusted the microphone with the self-confidence of someone who had never had to sleep in a basement, surrounded by old machines. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to see," Crawford announced, pointing to the metal prototype on the pedestal, "is the future of artificial intelligence. A code I developed entirely on my own, brick by brick." In the 15th row, Beatrice felt her stomach tie a knot that even her best screwdriver couldn't undo. She was wearing Arthur's jacket over her shoulders, her hands hidden in the pockets, where her fingers frantically worked a remote control she'd improvised from a toothbrush charger. "Arthur, what if his security code is better than mine?" she whispered, her voice wavering like a dial-up internet connection. "What if people see the evidence and think I'm the crazy hacker trying to steal from the genius again?" Arthur didn't answer with words. He simply extended his hand and placed it over Beatrice's, trembling inside the jacket pocket. He pressed his fingers firmly against hers, a gesture that said that this time, a billion-dollar company and a stubborn CEO were standing as her shield. "Crawford is an amateur, Beatrice," Arthur whispered back, without taking his eyes off the stage. He made the mistake of stealing a work of art without understanding that the artist always leaves a hidden signature. Press the button. On stage, Crawford hit play to launch the software demonstration that promised to revolutionize the financial market. "Observe the elegance of the algorithm," he began. Suddenly, the 80-inch LED screens surrounding the auditorium flickered. The blue bar graph disappeared, replaced by a giant image of a baby wearing sunglasses and a glitter diaper. Music began echoing through the state-of-the-art speakers. It wasn't an epic melody. It was the theme of a cheap diaper commercial, featuring a terribly off-key recorder flute and a children's chorus shrieking, "Dry baby, happy baby, does what it wants and nobody minds. What is this?" Crawford shouted, hammering the keyboard. "Get that off. It's a virus." "It's not a virus, Professor," Beatrice shouted, rising from the audience. Her voice, once shaky, now cut through the air like a laser. "It's my digital signature." She pressed another command. The diaper baby disappeared, and in its place, old chat windows, records of deleted emails, and original lines of code watermarked "Property of B. Martinez" began scrolling across the screens like a waterfall of evidence. "Security!" Crawford bellowed, pointing at Beatrice as two men in suits and earpieces advanced down the aisle. Arthur leaped to his feet, blocking the first security guard's path. He didn't use his fists, he used the presence of someone who owned half the buildings on that street. "If you touch my partner, I'll make sure the next conference you work is in a fast food parking lot," Arthur said, his voice calm and dangerous. The show is just getting started. On the main screen, a security video, which Beatrice had kindly recovered from Crawford's private server, showed the professor walking into her lab 5 years ago and copying her files while she was in the infirmary. The audience, made up of the biggest names in global technology, let out a collective gasp. The diaper music hit full volume. Crawford desperately tried to cover the screen with his own body, looking like a shipwreck survivor trying to patch a hole in an ocean liner with a piece of chewing gum. "Happy baby! Dry baby!" The entire auditorium burst out laughing. Some investors took photos. Others filmed the genius's humiliation in real time. Beatrice walked to the stage, passing the security guards who were now standing still, not knowing what to do. She climbed the steps, stood in front of Crawford, and took the prototype from the pedestal. "You said you built this all on your own, Crawford?" she asked, opening a small hidden latch at the base of the device. She pulled out a tiny photo of her grandmother, the same one that had lived inside Clotilde. Strange. I didn't know you were Miss Mercedes's grandson. Crawford collapsed into the podium chair, his face the color of a rotten eggplant. The charade was over. Beatrice looked out at the audience, then at Arthur, who was standing in the aisle with a sideways smile she had never seen on him before. It wasn't the satisfied smile of a CEO closing a deal. It was the look of someone who had just watched the person they admired conquer the world. She came down the stage steps with the prototype under her arm. Arthur met her at the bottom. "You were brilliant," he said, as the diaper music finally stopped, leaving an electric silence in the auditorium. "I told you Clotilde hated plagiarism," she answered, trying to keep her voice steady, but her fingers still reached for the safety of his jacket. "Can we leave now? I think I smell pickles in the coffee machine, and I haven't even installed that yet." Arthur laughed, draping his arm over her shoulders, shielding her from the camera flashes that were now beginning to go off. As they left through the side door, Beatrice felt the weight of the prototype and the warmth of Arthur's arm. Not knowing that today's victory had opened a door in her own heart's security system that no code could ever close. New York rain was nothing like the movies. It didn't fall in delicate drops, but in merciless buckets that made Beatrice's silk dress weigh 5 extra pounds. She stood on the sidewalk trying to shield Clotilde under Arthur's jacket, while water ran down her nose and straight into her mouth every time she tried to curse. "I hate this city and its inability to predict cold fronts." Beatrice yelled through clenched teeth as a cab rolled through a puddle and baptized her high-top sneakers with muddy water. Arthur, who looked like a catalog model who had just fallen into a swimming pool in his suit and everything, stopped in front of her. He wasn't trying to escape the rain. He was looking at Beatrice as if she were the only dry and brilliant thing in the entire state of New York. "Are you laughing?" she demanded, indignant, pointing her screwdriver at him. "I look like a Shih Tzu that fell into a storm drain and you're laughing, Sterling?" "I've never felt so alive," Arthur said, taking a step forward, ignoring the water soaking through his white shirt. "I spent 30 years trying to be the perfect CEO, the perfect son, the perfect man. And then you showed up with a toaster and blew up my elevator, my company, and my logic." Beatrice stopped fighting with the broken umbrella. Her fingers released Clotilde for a second, and she felt the warmth of Arthur's body defying the cold of the storm. "I didn't blow up anything, Sterling," she whispered, her voice softening as the water drew paths across her face. "I just made a technical adjustment to your reality." Arthur closed the distance. He held her face in both hands, ignoring the smeared mascara and the smell of rain. "Fix this right now, Martinez," he ordered, his voice husky. He kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted like rain, electricity, and all the tension that had been building up. Beatrice kissed him back with the same intensity, her fingers getting lost in Arthur's wet hair. For a moment, there were no codes, no shareholders, no traumatic pasts. There were only the two of them, on a noisy sidewalk, at the center of a chaotic universe. When they pulled apart, breathless, Arthur smiled and pressed his forehead against hers. "I'll call the car. Let's go home and dry off that war weapon of yours," he said, pointing at Clotilde. Arthur walked a few steps away to get a signal on his phone and speak to the driver. Beatrice stayed there, smiling like a fool, her heart beating faster than an overclocked processor. She reached into the inner pocket of his jacket to check the time on her phone. A notification reading, "Recovered old message," lit up the screen. It was from the Empire Tech private server, a backup she had programmed to complete after Crawford's unmasking. Beatrice opened the file, expecting to find more evidence against the professor. But what she saw made her blood freeze faster than the rainwater. It was an investigation report dated 3 weeks before the elevator incident. The title read, "Recruitment Target, Beatrice Martinez. Location, Brooklyn Basement." Below it was a series of system commands signed by A. Sterling. The final command read, "Simulate critical elevator failure at 9:15. Ensure I am inside. Force her intervention for field testing." Beatrice felt her stomach turn. She reread the lines of code. The elevator lockdown, the luck of him being there, the encounter that changed her life. All of it had been a high-risk recruitment test. A human resources marketing move disguised as fate. Arthur came back, pocketing his phone, wearing the smile of someone who had the world in his hands. "The car arrives in 2 minutes, Beatrice." We can. He stopped. He saw the way she was looking at him. It was no longer the look of the woman who had kissed him 60 seconds ago. It was the look of an engineer who had just found a fatal error in the system. Simulate critical failure, Arthur? She asked, her voice cold and sharp, holding out the phone with the screen glowing toward him. I wasn't a savior in that elevator. I was a lab rat you put in a metal cage to see if I knew how to bite. Arthur went pale. The light in his eyes disappeared, replaced by a guilt that no corporate excuse could hide. Beatrice, I needed someone with your talent. I researched every detail of your story. I knew you were the only one who could truly save me. You didn't want to be saved, Sterling, she said, stepping back, Clotilde now feeling like dead weight in her arms. You wanted a secret weapon, and you figured that if you created a movie-worthy story, I'd be loyal to you forever. It wasn't just that. What happened after, what we felt. He tried to step closer, but she raised her hand, palm open, building an invisible wall. What we felt was based on a programmed lie, she said with finality. A warm tear, very different from the cold rain, fell across the phone screen. You're just like Crawford, Arthur. The difference is that he steals code, and you steal people's reality so it fits into your empire. Beatrice turned her back and started walking in the opposite direction from the approaching car. She didn't run. She walked with the dignity of someone who had just deleted the most important person in her life from her personal database. Beatrice. Arthur shouted through the rain, but the sound of New York traffic swallowed his voice. She kept walking, holding Clotilde against her chest, feeling the cold finally win out over the warmth. She had recovered her name and her career. But looking at the city lights reflecting in the puddles on the pavement, she realized the most dangerous bug of all was the one she had let happen in her own heart. Beatrice went down into the subway, leaving Arthur alone on the sidewalk. Not knowing that the spy device she had destroyed in the penthouse had a backup copy sending data to an address she didn't recognize, Arthur's father's personal office. Arthur Sterling was staring at a fried egg with the same intensity he gave to billion-dollar mergers, and he was losing the battle. The yolk had exploded, the white looked like burnt rubber, and the $2,000 titanium skillet was emitting a distress signal that echoed through the entire empty penthouse. Why won't things cooperate? Arthur shouted into the empty kitchen, trying to flip the egg with a silver spatula and managing to launch it directly against the pristine tile wall. He sat down on the kitchen floor, surrounded by eggshells and smoke, wearing a silk bathrobe and one slipper from each pair. It had been 4 days since Beatrice Martinez walked out of his life, and the luxury penthouse now looked like the set of an end-of-the-world film in which only one helpless billionaire survived. Arthur picked up his phone, which had been lying next to a day-old pizza box, the one he had finally learned to order, though the delivery guy now called him the sad guy on the 20th floor. He looked at the empty spot where Clotilde used to sit. The void there was a black hole sucking up all his motivation. I'm a disaster, Clotilde, he murmured to the empty space. I can't even fry an egg without triggering the building's evacuation protocol. The intercom rang with aggressive persistence. Arthur dragged himself to the screen. It was the board's lawyers, all wearing the expressions of people about to announce a funeral. Mr. Sterling opened the door. Marcus's voice, now acting as the board's mediator, came through the speaker. We have received your total philanthropic restructuring proposal. The board believes you have suffered a psychotic break caused by stress from the conference, donating 90% of Empire Tech shares to a social technology project in Brooklyn. This is insanity. Arthur opened the door without even bothering to change out of his bathrobe. He faced the 6 men in gray suits while holding a piece of burnt toast in his left hand. It's not insanity, Marcus, Arthur said, his voice hoarse but resolute. It's a bug fix. I've spent my whole life optimizing profits and neglecting the engineering of what really matters. If the board doesn't approve the transfer to the Martinez Foundation, I resign right now and take every software patent with me. You can't be serious, one of the shareholders shouted, sidestepping an egg yolk stain on the floor. You're destroying your legacy over a rogue mechanic. Arthur stopped chewing his burnt toast. He walked up to the shareholder, stopping millimeters from his face. Her name is Beatrice, Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. And she's not a rogue mechanic. She's the only person who managed to give this building a soul for 5 minutes. Now get out of my house. The transfer documents will be signed this afternoon, with or without your support." When the lawyers left, grumbling and threatening incompetency proceedings for mental incapacity, Arthur felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders, but the emptiness in his chest remained. He walked to the office and opened the desk drawer. There was the small screwdriver Beatrice had left behind on the day of the break-in. He spun it between his fingers, mimicking the gesture she made when she was nervous. He noticed that the chair beside his, where she used to sit to critique his code, was covered by a thin layer of dust. The chaotic energy that made him feel every second was worth it had left with her. Arthur picked up a fountain pen and signed the last document. He was no longer the CEO of Empire Tech. He was just Arthur. And Arthur had no idea how to apologize to a woman who valued the truth above any billion. He picked up the screwdriver, put it in the bathrobe pocket, and walked to the balcony, looking out at the lights of Brooklyn in the distance. He knew Beatrice didn't want his money. She wanted the man he had pretended to be in the elevator. The problem was that man had only truly come to exist after she taught him how to fix things that didn't come with a manual. Suddenly, the computer in the office let out a notification sound. An authorized remote access signal blinked on the screen. Arthur ran back. Someone was getting into the system. But it wasn't an attack. It was a cleanup command. Someone was deleting every record of the elevator simulation from the central servers, as if erasing a scar. "Beatrice?" Arthur whispered to the screen, his heart racing. The cursor stopped in the center of the screen and typed just one sentence before disconnecting. "A good engineer knows that some parts can't be fixed, Arthur. They need to be replaced with something real." Arthur Sterling was sitting at his desk, which no longer had stacks of reports. Only a single pizza box and Beatrice's small screwdriver. The silence of the penthouse was so thick he could hear the sound of his own regret knocking against the glass walls. "You know, Sterling, for a financial genius, you're terrible at keeping doors locked." A voice heavy with sarcasm echoed from the entryway. Arthur leaped up, nearly tipping over his chair. Beatrice Martinez was standing there, wearing her classic work jumpsuit, but with his jacket, now clean and pressed, folded over her arm. In her hands, she carried an object that looked like a cross between an old radio and a cardiac defibrillator, decorated with Christmas lights. "Beatrice?" Arthur breathed, his heart pulling an illegal maneuver in his chest. "How did you get in?" "I designed this building's security system. Remember? I left a digital back door that your legal department wouldn't find in 100 years, she said, walking to the desk and setting the strange object on the marble. "Besides, I came to get what's rightfully mine." Arthur looked at the company donation document sitting on the desk. "The company is yours, Beatrice. I've already signed everything. You can kick me out right now if you want." "I didn't come for the company, you idiot," she shot back, stepping closer and connecting two cables from the strange device to Arthur's wrists before he could object. "I came to test my new prototype, the Martinez Lie Detector Model 01. It's calibrated to detect micro-oscillations in the voice and perspiration of stubborn CEOs." The device's lights began spinning in a hesitant yellow tone. "Beatrice, what are you doing?" Arthur asked, feeling the cold metal against his skin. "Be quiet and answer," she ordered, her eyes locked on his. "First question. Do you miss our daily arguments about the air conditioner temperature?" "Not at all," Arthur answered promptly. "Beep, beep, beep." The device let out a sharp sound and the lights went red instantly. "Lie," Beatrice smiled, crossing her arms. "The pulse sensor says you love getting worked up with me." "Second question. Did you really donate Empire Tech because you were sorry? Or was it just a financial maneuver to impress me?" Arthur looked at the truth box, then at the woman who had turned his world upside down. He didn't hesitate. "I'd give up 10 empires if it would make you look at me again the way you did in that elevator, before I ruined everything with my ego," he said, his voice steady. The box let out a soft sound and an emerald green light flooded the room. Beatrice felt the weight on her shoulders lift. She released a long breath, her fingers finally stopping their tapping on the device. "The algorithm doesn't lie, Sterling," she whispered. "Then it's my turn," Arthur said, pulling her closer, the cables still connecting them both to the machine. "Beatrice Martinez, do you believe a man who doesn't know his own mailing address can learn to build a future with you?" Beatrice looked at the box, then at the man in front of her. She saw the flour smear on his bathrobe and the determination in eyes that had once only searched for profit. "I believe you're a project full of system failures, Arthur," she said, a sideways smile lighting up her face. "But I've always been better at fixing things than building from scratch." "And the final question," Arthur whispered, millimeters from her face. "Do you love me?" There was an electric silence. Beatrice looked at Clotilde, sitting on the floor near the door, lights blinking in a happy rhythm. "Yes," she answered. The box blazed with an emerald green so bright it looked like a lighthouse at the top of Manhattan. The sound it made wasn't a beep, it was a small victory melody that Beatrice had secretly programmed. "Good thing," Beatrice said, pulling him by the collar into the kiss that would seal their definitive partnership. "Because Clotilde is getting old and she needs a grandfather who knows at least where the nearest repair shop is." Arthur laughed in the middle of the kiss, feeling that his code was finally complete. "I'll take the job. But on one condition." "What?" she asked, already beginning to dismantle the lie detector box. "No baby music at breakfast." Beatrice pretended to think it over, pressing a button on Clotilde that made the toaster eject a perfectly golden slice of toast with the word "yes" burned in the center. "I'll consider your case, partner. Now let's go. We've got a world to fix, and I think your luxury coffee machine is about to short-circuit." Arthur watched Beatrice bouncing off toward the kitchen, realizing that life would never again be predictable, organized, or quiet, and that this was, finally, the greatest system update he'd ever received. There in that penthouse full of code, wires, and burnt coffee, Arthur understood something that no financial empire had ever been able to teach. Some people don't come into our lives to follow the rules. They come to rebuild the parts of us that have been broken for years. And maybe that's exactly why Beatrice never showed up to save Empire Tech. She showed up to save the man who existed behind the CEO. Because in the end, it doesn't matter how many systems someone can control. If the heart keeps running on autopilot, Arthur showed us that money can't replace truth. Beatrice showed us that intelligence without courage doesn't change the world. And together, they proved that even the most broken people can become the best version of themselves when they find someone who truly sees them. If this story touched you in some way, maybe it's because everyone, at some point, has felt out of place, deceived, or too alone to believe in a new beginning. But sometimes life changes exactly when everything seems to have spun out of control. And if you made it all the way here, comment Clotilde in the comments, because it really helps the channel and shows YouTube that human stories like this one deserve to keep reaching more people. Now tell me, would you have forgiven Arthur after finding out the truth about the elevator? The end.